Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. It's all true, including the geek part. I am going to share a little bit about my dissertation research today, but it's less about the dissertation itself and more about kind of a little journey I went on in the midst of doing it. The title of my talk today is actually A New Age for Old Medicine. Now, what do I mean by this new age? Not new age in that kind of way. But we're certainly living in a really interesting time for people like me, people who study stories. Right? We're in a new world, globalization, that's our big word, right? And global communication. And what it means for people like me is the chance to learn stories from people I never thought I'd meet, from countries I never thought I'd visit, right? And as part of that new age and getting exposed to these sorts of things, I find that we often tend to go back and start reevaluating our own stories, right? The stories that we have that tell us who we are and where we come from and what we value. That's what happened to me when I was doing my research on early modern medicine and literature, so 16th and 17th centuries. I started rethinking a particular story that I had been told 100 times since I was a child. And the story, you probably know it, it goes a little something like this. Once upon a time, there was a land terrorized by a great monster, the monster of ignorance, right? And then a special new hero arose, the hero of objectivity, of science, of technology, of progress. And that hero very quickly slew our monster of ignorance and brought us into a new age. That's what I grew up hearing about science, about medicine, that we're always getting better. But when I went back to read some of our old stories, our forgotten stories, I started discovering, you know, that's not quite how the story went. People from 300, 400, even 500 years ago, maybe they didn't have our technology, certainly didn't know about germ theory, DNA, they never would have understood, but they did have some knowledge about health, about our bodies, about how we live in our bodies and how we live together in our bodies, that in a strange way we're only now, in the 21st century, coming back to. So first let me tell you a little story of a character. And this character is you. I want you to imagine that you are someone born right around 1604, right? And let's talk about what your life and your health would have been like, right? First, you'd have been ushered into the world in a scene that looked a little bit like this. The person who helped bring you into this world would not have been some university-trained physician. She would have been a midwife, not some woman just, shall we say, working from vague experience and wild superstitions the way we might imagine. Now, this would have been a woman who had gone through a strict apprenticeship system. She would have studied for a minimum of 7 years under a master midwife before practicing on her own. She'd have been of very high social standing, a position of trust in her community, licensed by the church. And she gives us our first glimpse into a very surprisingly modern part of early modern medicine. It was surprisingly open. Now, it's not to say that everyone got to play whatever role they wanted to, but women, men, poor people, rich people, educated, uneducated, lay and professional, everyone had a role to play from the moment you were born in keeping you healthy, keeping you alive. Now, as you can see, the mother and the midwife are not by themselves. There's a bevy of other people in this room. These would have been the matrons of your community, women who had their own households, not just their children and their husbands, their servants, the apprentices, their extended family, 20, 30, 40 people, and they were in charge of 90% of the health care that those people would ever experience. So that gives us the second part of our very surprisingly modern story. This was a communal health system. These women would have referred to themselves as masters of huswifery. Sounds a lot like housewife, doesn't it? Housewifery, some people try to say. But huswifery is not what you think it was. These women would have learned some of their skills from books published by specialists. Specialists not simply in things like how to wash your linen and get it its brightest white, but as you can see here, you're not a complete woman without skill in physic and surgery, as well as cookery and everything else. And these books give us another glimpse into the third, very surprising part of this story. Early modern medicine was highly individualized. If you were to flip open this book looking for a cure for your infected eye, for your terrible raging headache, you wouldn't find one cure, or two, or three. You might have 5, 10, 15 different cures, because these people believed something that, again, we're only now coming back to, that every individual human body is just that. It's individual, it's unique, it works in its own way that nobody else's body works like. And so there can't be one way to treat and help everyone. Everyone needs something different. What might you need? You might need some medications that these women would make in very complicated distillation processes that are quite reminiscent of early chemistry. You might need some medicines that she would have mastered from her knowledge of herbology, for those of you who like a little Harry Potter reference now and again, right? These women would have been very similar to early botanists. The identification, collection, preservation, and use of a variety of herbs. Of course, not everything can be cured with herbs. Not everything can be cured with a tincture or a liquid. So if it was something, if you became ill with something that was just a little bit beyond the scope of a housewife's abilities, you might have to go outside to different help. Not better help, just different help that could provide you with different things for your unique needs. You might, for example, have to go to your local apothecary. This would be a male medical practitioner, a little bit similar to our modern pharmacist, but again, this is not a university-trained person. This is someone who has the money and the ability and the apprenticeship training to create more complicated medicines than perhaps you could with home mechanics. On the other hand, if you were so unlucky as to shatter a leg or have appendicitis or something like that, you might end up having to visit this guy, the barber surgeon. I'll repeat that, the barber surgeon, yes. He can slice you open, sew you back up, and then give you a haircut and a shave at the end. Again, we think of this as being particularly backward, perhaps. The idea that, you know, your surgeon would also be the guy who made sure you got a nice close shave for your date. But again, these are very respected people in their professions and in their local communities. They were members of guilds, right? They underwent a lot of training. They simply divided up their idea of what specialization was about differently than we do today. These are the people who are dexterous. These are the people who can work very finely with sharp implements, right? Dexterity. That was what they gave you. But if none of this worked, or maybe if you had a little bit more money than most, you might finally call in the person you've been waiting for, the physician. And you finally found someone with a university degree. But a visit to or a visit from the physician, not what you might imagine it was. They were practitioners of medicine. They could craft and prescribe very intricate medications for you and your very personal needs. But they were far more theoretical than we would imagine a physician should be. They liked to think a lot, and they really didn't like touching people. They might take your pulse and examine your urine, and from that deduce what was wrong with you. Right? Far more philosophical. So as you can see, your health was in the hands of dozens, if not hundreds of people, and all of them had to play a role in it. Now, why was this? We're so used to thinking of medicine as a discipline, as one field that is mastered by a particular group of people. What is it about the early modern mind that made them feel that health and wellness could be the responsibility of so many? And the idea is this, and this is the fourth thing I want to say, is that something very modern we're getting back to, the idea that human beings are an integral and integrated part of a complex universe, right? Here, what we have in a depiction, this is an illustration from a book by Robert Flood. What you're seeing is a depiction of the concept of the macrocosm and the microcosm. One of the great early modern ideas was that this universe is so harmonious, so beautiful, so well planned, and so well ordered that you could see those patterns reflected in the human body itself. The macrocosm, the universe, studying natural laws, could tell you how to understand the microcosm of the human body itself. Now again, we look at something like this and the idea that, you know, perhaps your liver is being controlled by Sagittarius and your mind by Capricorn, and we tend to dismiss this. Well, maybe we've moved past the idea of the zodiac. Maybe we've moved past the idea of the motions of the planets being echoed in ourselves. But what that key underlying concept, that your health and your body are not contained, that it's more than just you. You're not a closed system. Just now starting to come back to this in common medical practice. So this is your physician philosopher, as I like to call him, the person who's looking up at the heavens and at the world around him to try to understand how we work. But the other beautiful thing about early modern medicine is that although it was competitive, it wasn't exclusionary. And just because a lot of people were looking to the heavens doesn't mean that everyone was. This is also the great age of anatomy. Here we have depictions on the left by Vesalius, one of the great Renaissance anatomists, and on the right, an image from Robert Hooke's Microcosmographia, published in English, right? While your physician philosopher might be looking to the heavens, there were others who were turning inward on the body itself, believing yet again that some of its greatest secrets might be its smallest. They were incredibly astute. They developed many of the surgical and anatomizing instruments that we still use today. It's a little bit frightening sometimes how familiar those still are. And on rare occasions, their knowledge even was paired with the artist and the artist brush to render depictions of the human body unparalleled in their exactness until the modern era. This being a view of the human brain by the great architect and artist Sir Christopher Wren of the 17th century. All right, so where do we go with all of this? Why am I bringing this to you today? Because we're in a world of new stories, right? And quite often our reaction to a new story is one of two things: to either throw away all our old stories and embrace the new, or to hold tightly to what we have. But what excites me about medicine and about this new world we're living in is that we're not, some of us, doing that. We are rediscovering the wisdom of some of these earlier stories we'd forgotten. Stories about human nature, about how we work as a community, right? About the idea of health being more than just fighting off disease, but it's about your whole self, your sense of balance, your sense of joy, your sense of belonging. And we're not throwing out our modern stories. We're blending now. Individualized medicine is all the rage, isn't it? Gene therapy, right? Custom medications, rediscovering that individuals are just that. They're individual, they're unique. They deserve to be treated as unique creatures, but at the same time, that the health of ourselves and of our world is the responsibility of everyone around you, and you are responsible to them equally. We're a community now. It's a new community. It's an exciting community, and we're starting to build our own new stories. Thank you.